And then I'll shut the doors.
Oh, in Victoria. I know that. I know. Wow. Hey. Thank you guys all for coming. I know that we are running a little bit late, but what an awesome morning we had. Chris talking about NIDP and Chad talking about his experience and great fun. So hopefully you're all energized and ready to start the afternoon session. With us today is Rob Rickard. Rob is currently happily retired from public procurement after many, many years. Prior to retirement, Rob spent 17 years as the Chief Procurement Officer at the Oregon Department of Administrative Services, 3.5 years as the Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Transportation, and 8 years as the Chief Procurement Officer at the State. He's a graduate of Florida Pacific College. He holds his CCPO through NIDP and his OPDC through Oregon Department of Administrative Services. He's a regular speaker for NIDP, does webinars, chapter conferences, and other venues. He's trained throughout the U.S. and Canada. During his career, Rob has won many awards. In 2000, he won the prestigious Harold F. Vaughn Award through OPPA. In 2001, he was the OPPA and the NIGP Professional Manager of the Year. In 2006, he was the NIGP Distinguished Service Award. In 2008, he won the Oregon Department of Administrative Services Partners in Public Purchasing the Lifetime Achievement Award. And in 2009, he was the OPPA's Mentor of the Year. Rob has served as an officer on both the Columbia chapter and the OPPA chapters of NIGP, and is currently a past president and continues to be very active in both chapters. Rob and his wife reside in a small town of Canby, Oregon, and they enjoy their retirement very much. When he's not serving in public procurement profession, Rob stays active with the Oregon Roadrunners Club, where he was recently named to the Hall of Fame. And as I recall, you have been a longtime member of the Hood to Coast team.
Yeah.
And your team is one of the oldest age-wise and member-wise participants in the Hood to Coast race.
That's correct.
All right, welcome, Rob. He is going to talk to us this afternoon.
Okay. A couple of disclaimers. You start each class with a disclaimer. I brought a suit and tie, but I saw that, the tone was already established. Rick didn't have a tie. The next guy didn't have a tie. So I thought, I'll get away with it. If you really want to see me with a tie, my wife will make me put a suit and tie on for the banquet tonight. So come to the banquet and you'll see me with a suit and tie. Hope it doesn't offend anybody, but it's a little late to change now. So we're stuck with what we've got. Any of you that have been in any of my classes know that it's a pretty informal opportunity to exchange information. So if I say something that doesn't make sense, let's talk about it. We do it differently where I work. So let's talk about those things. Specifications, I've taught a lot of different classes. And over the years, I've found the specifications by itself is almost like reading 4 or 5 chapters of the book and then putting it down. You never know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. So then I started including the statement of work, because specs and the statement of work, huge interrelationship there. And then I got to thinking, the RFPs are such a unique creature. When I started work, and by the way, You won't see my picture out there in some of the things that you see in the hallway. Some of the folks have started rumors that that's wrong. No, it isn't. I'm not that old. I will admit to being mature, and that's the extent of it. But I did a triathlon a week ago. I was the oldest person there. And that's kind of a humbling experience in itself. You know, a young kid passed me, way to go, and I'm thinking, yeah, you're just thinking, way to go, old tiger. Be that as it may, I won my division. Isn't that great? That's because I outlived everybody. The competition is all in a different place, and I don't want to be it. So I'll do another triathlon when I get the chance. But as Melody said, and I apologize, I've got a hoodie coat shirt on. You know, if any of you have ever sat through my webinars, you would see me in running shorts and socks and a t-shirt, a running shirt. Because that's the thing I like about webinars. I can just sit at home and do them. You guys see my professional picture there, have no idea that I'm really just comfortable. And in fact, my wife has a dog, and the dog is named Dooley, and Dooley thinks he owns the world. I mean, that's his, you know, it's a terrier part of it. But, and on at least 3 different webinars, Dooley has made his voice heard. And it's funny because you can hear the people. Does somebody have a dog in their office? I'm never admitting to it. But, you know, life is good, and I'm enjoying retirement, but I love the opportunity to share information. So, over 30 years of public procurement, another 10 or 12 in the private sector. I've been there. I've done a lot of those things. I've done a lot of them wrong. And I've learned from those errors. You know, errors aren't bad if you learn from it. So make mistakes, but make mistakes because you're pushing that envelope. You know, all we've heard this morning has been talking about the future and pushing out. And that's what I'm encouraging each of you to do. So ask questions, you know, work with me through that. If I'm not communicating accurately, if I'm not projecting loudly enough, let me know. I raised 4 boys, and I don't usually have a problem projecting. So that be that as it may. But let's go ahead and get started. And one last disclaimer, I'm technologically impaired. So if the computer goes down, it's probably my fault. But we'll see. Oh, it works. Hey, great. So we're talking about specifications. They're the way that we communicate to the suppliers. Because if they don't know exactly what we're looking for, then we're not communicating accurately. So it communicates the requirements that we need, the outcome that we're looking for. And one of the huge changes that I've seen I've been retired for 8 years, so I can say in 38 years of public procurement, I've seen a shift from that standard low bid specification to describing the outcome that our customer needs or wants. So that's what we're looking at with specifications. They're our way of communicating to the supplier the exact requirements or the outcome that we're seeking. Effective communication, and really that's what we're talking about. Specifications are that form of communication. This first bullet, often the message sent is not the message received. Think about that. Let me share a story with you about a young lady from Southern California. She is, pardon my expression, she was a beach babe. I mean, she had blonde hair, she had a tan body, she loved to surf, and she was on the beach as much as she could be. Pretty soon, being a young lady, she attracted the attention of the young man. The young man really liked her, and he was particularly enamored with her swimsuit figure. Great, okay. And as all good stories end, they married. Great opportunity. After the marriage, those other things came along like kids. And after 2 kids, where is my swimsuit figure? So she was wrestling with this. She tried this time. She tried that time. She tried Oprah's time. Did not work for her. Finally, she was looking at a scrapbook and she saw that picture again that her husband loved so much. She said, I'm going to fix this. So she taped it to the refrigerator because that was her problem. She needed a snack. She'd go right to the refrigerator. She taped that swimsuit picture to the refrigerator. And the first week, she lost 5 pounds. Now, that's a pretty good diet. Would you agree? Yeah. Guess what? Her husband gained 15 pounds. Because the message that she sent, I need to be careful what I eat, was not the message that her husband received. So you can see with that story how sometimes what we think we're sending to the suppliers isn't what the suppliers are getting. So that's why it's so important. If it can be misinterpreted or misunderstood, some supplier or suppliers out there are going to do it. So we need to be very careful. Clearly articulate what it is that we wanted. You know, the social media, and I don't do that. I wouldn't even be on Facebook, except my wife likes Facebook. And she said, you should be on Facebook. And I said, no, I don't need to be. She signed me on Facebook. In the first year, I had 3 friends. Oh. Anyway, be that as it may. Social media, a gal said, I need a husband. She put out a sign or something on social media saying, husband wanted. That was on a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had almost 100 responses. You can have mine. So be sure that when we're communicating, that we're communicating exactly what it is that we're looking for. And you just heard my story about the weight loss. Okay, and here's another very important thing for us in our world of public procurement. The specification is the legalized part of the solicitation. By that I mean, if a supplier is not performing, where are we going to go? We're going to go to the specs and say, you're bound to meet those. So it's very important that we do that. And here's a quote from a scholar in the area of public procurement. To adequately articulate to the supplier the performance expected and to measure that supplier performance, or worse, and this is just as important for us, supplier non-performance. It's not enough to just go to the supplier and say, you're not doing a good job. You go to them and say, you're not doing a good job, and here's the specifications, and here's where you're not meeting them. So it's that legalized part of what we are and what we do. The buyer has to have a measurable metric. I had a customer come to me one day, and these things always happen on Friday night. She came to me and she said, she described, it took her probably 15 minutes to describe what she was looking for. And she said, I need this by Monday. This is Friday. So guess who worked over the weekend to prepare that? And I gave it back to her on Monday because she was in my office at 8:30. I gave it back to her. She went back. She threw the paper back across my desk. Pardon my vernacular. She said, this is a bunch of shit. Whoa, wait, how do I work with that? So I, rather than reacting, I tried to work through it and figure out, well, what is it you're looking for? Finally, she said, again, pardon my vernacular, damn it, I'll know it when I see it. Now, that's not a specification that we can work with. No, it's not going to happen. So there has to be a metric. It has to be measured. Now, so that's probably the biggest challenge that we face as public purchasing professionals. When our customer comes in and says, I need this and I need it today. Okay, describe it for me. You know, and that's where the rub comes. And that's where we bring value to the process by being able to take a big nebulous thing like that director was looking for and bring it into measurable metrics that we can work with.
So, some tips on good specs. Be sure to clearly articulate what it is that you want. Okay, the king wanted a moat around his castle. So, dig a standard moat 50 feet from the castle wall. Sounds like a good plan, right? Which side of the wall? See, probably, this isn't going to work too well, is it? Because he's trying to keep the bad guys out. It's not going to help. So make sure that when you're articulating, that you're articulating enough information. Guidelines for writing specs. Don't go with the unnecessary words. Try to make them concise. Render assistance to. What are we really talking about? Help. Right. Due to the fact that, because, prior to the start of, before. See, you can do like the attorneys. I swear attorneys get paid by the word that they write. But prior to the start of, why don't we just say before? But there's a lot of creative stuff that we can do. The more flowery you're trying, and often our customers come to us and they've spent weeks on this treatise that they have. It's like a doctrinal statement. And they have all these flowery things in there. And it's our role to reduce the prior to the start of to the befores. Because guess what? If we start doing this and sending it out to the suppliers, if there's any possibility to be confused by it, your suppliers are going to find that. So make sure that we're using clear writing and avoid the redundancy. Assemble together. Why don't you say single? Same thing with rectangular in shape, rectangular. Mutually agreeable. Is there any of these words on the right that don't adequately describe on the left? So think about those things as you're developing. And what's that again? Desist from enumerating your fowl prior to their emergence from the shop. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. So, you know, it sounds kind of silly, and I take it with a grain of salt, but I want to share with you these ideas to get you thinking. You know, it's great to be here at the conference and all that, but next week, next month, next year, think about these things as you're working with your customer and preparing those specifications. Some of the goals that typically drive the specification process. Big one, the requirements of the end user. Without the end users, we don't have a job, right? Right. So make sure that we're articulating the requirements. The more mission critical that the product or service that you're trying to buy for your customer, the more mission critical it is, the more time that you're going to want to spend with the user, really teasing out what these requirements are. And make sure they get the material that they need to achieve their objective. We heard Rick talking this morning about our end users. You're saying, you know, we expect outcomes. So the specification has to encourage competition, has to be fair, and it has to protect the integrity of the process. Because as soon as we start getting creative and say, well, no, we really didn't mean this, we really meant that, and as soon as we start using specifications that are what I call squishy, that's a professional, public purchasing professional term, squishy. As soon as your specification is squishy, your suppliers are going to interpret it incorrectly. And as soon as we start allowing that squishiness to continue, it blows the integrity of the process. So let's talk about a government project. And I know a few of you in this audience probably are aware of this. But for some of you, you're going to think, what's he talking about? How many of you remember the due warning system? Yeah, not many. Usually I get a few more hands in that. I got to recognize I'm getting older, so that means you guys are getting older too. So anyway, the due early warning system was back in the days in the Cold War with Russia. And we were always afraid Russia was going to be sending airplanes over to bomb us. So we had this early warning system. National defense, so it was pretty important. So the installation, and this was a true federal project. The installation was at a remote location because typically we didn't have these new warning systems in downtown Chicago, off in the boonies. So the installation was a remote location. Service was critical to national security. Immediate response, if there was a problem with this early warning system, immediate response was justified. The requirement that was laid out in the solicitation was must have a representative within 50 miles of the facility. Now remember, we're talking way out in the boonies anyway. So 50 miles within the facility, okay. Let me tell you how they achieved success. And you can decide whether it really was success. So they had responses from several different companies. This was a big contract. One company said, we have a representative within 17 miles of the location. Wow! And the services that were provided seemed to meet the requirements, so they made the award to one company. Company installed things, service rep was there, but never on site. So as the company finished up, like any computer system, for a while, after about 6 months, it had a hiccup. So they called, they had a special phone. In those days, they didn't have phones with this size. They had phones that were the size of a brick. And they picked up the red phone, they called the service rep. The service rep answered the phone, we've got a problem, I'll be right there. He was over there in a few minutes. Walked in, looked at the computer, and said, you're right, it's not working. So he went back then and used the same red phone and called the company that provided the service and said, your system's not working. Is that what they really wanted?
No.
No! But because they didn't have any greater specification than within 50 miles, wow. How could they have written a better specification?
We can do the repairs or capable of doing the repairs.
More
Right.
specific.
First thing you want to do is define what a representative is, because this guy was a hermit. He lived in the hinter regions of Nevada because he didn't like people and he wanted his isolation. So he agreed to this contract because they paid him well, and he didn't have to do a darn thing except answer that ring. So service rep is one thing. What did they want?
So they will fix it.
They wanted somebody to fix it, and they wanted it to be done quickly. So instead of saying must be within 50 miles, service response within 2 hours. You see, you're not changing the dynamic of it a lot. It's not hard to write that specification. You've got a metric that's very easy to measure. Are they here in 2 hours? Boom. Okay. That really did happen. The next time that they did it, they did tighten up these specs. Okay. Only specify what you need. Early in my tenure with the Department of Administrative Services, I had a customer that wanted all these extra add-ons and things. And we said, well, we really won't award to it, but the way they had structured the solicitation, they got a lot more than they wanted. So only specify what you need. The importance of good specification development. It's your agency what they want. And this is huge for us. If we have happy customers, they continue to use our service. If we have unhappy customers, they find all kinds of creative ways to get around it. Levels the playing field, and we like happy suppliers. Happy suppliers don't complain to our legislators. And those are fun. You know, when an unhappy supplier copies 16 different folks from the legislature, that becomes very cumbersome. And it makes sound bid documents. So everybody wins, everybody's happy. Define what it is that you need. So declare, I'm glad it wasn't my fault. I did a class a while back, and I'm so hard of hearing that the only thing I can hear is my dog barking. And I was going through a class, and all of a sudden, whose dog is barking? Whose dog? You know, this was my dog, not my wife's dog. It happened, so that's all right. Now, any of you that haven't had a call yet, that you forgot to silence your phone, that would be bad. Okay, define what it is that you need. And my apologies if I'm embarrassed. Okay. Now the lady comes in and says, hey, I want a chicken dinner. The cook comes out and says, hey, you've got cracked corn millet, a couple of beetles, fine dinner. So be sure that you understand, you know, typically, like I just had dinner last night and I asked, I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since the morning and I'd driven over. I said, how many pieces of fish do I get with fish and chips? Ask questions if you're uncertain. Fact that the chicken dinner is $2.95 says, well, maybe I better ask a question or two. Was the chicken dead 3 weeks ago? Whatever, but make sure that you find out and figure out what it is that you're asking. Our role in purchasing, the end user typically knows what they want. Often they know the exact supplier that they want you to make the award to. I mean, sure all of you have had that end user come in and say, here's the purchase order, and that's the supplier I want. And end of the day, well, not quite. But often they know the product or service that they want. Our role is to help them to figure out and articulate what that need is while still providing opportunity. Because remember that slide just before, we have to keep the suppliers happy. Specifications should foster competition. I've taught throughout the US and in Canada, and I've never found an organization, local, state, federal level, that doesn't have some requirement to foster competition. That's a basic tenet of public procurement. Vague detail. Scanning system must be able to capture an edited high resolution for output to a laser image center for all documents. Well, that's pretty broad and vague, and any supplier that's providing photocopier or scanning equipment like that, that leaves an awful lot. But let's add a few words. Scanning system, capture and edit high resolution. How high? Up to 1,200 dots per inch. For output to a laser image and accommodate an image area up to 11 by 17. 60 more words, and you've taken a kind of a sloppy, vague specification and brought it together. Suppliers will give you what you're looking for with this spec. With the other spec, you're going to get from the bottom end to the top end. So, and the pricing will reflect accordingly. Conduct market research. Now, Rick said something this morning that really shocked me. He said, you know, our review has shown that market analysis, market research, same thing. Market analysis, only 1 of 4 do market analysis. How many of you actually do market research on your mission critical stuff? Yeah. You know, you're not going to probably do a great deal of market research on the onesie twosie stuff, the pens and the pencils and the papers and the widgets and the whatever. Because, you know, the industry is such a broad industry, you can buy those from any place. So, but you are going to do market research on the mission critical stuff. When you can come back to one of your customers and say, I found an option, I found an alternative, they're going to love you. So be prepared to do that market research. We have a responsibility to do the research periodically. Again, If it's the onesie twosie stuff, you're probably not gonna spend a lot of time digging through that and doing market research and whatever. More valuable the item is to the agency's success, the greater the frequency and the more in-depth the research must be. If we can find acceptable substitutes or improved products or services available, again, we look like we're really superstars. Are there changes in the market during raw materials that will impact product availability? Thing happened years ago when I was with Department of Transportation. Department of Transportation had an infusion of a lot of federal dollars and things, so we had lots of money to spend. And we also had 156 bridges that were either closed or were restricted. That's not good. Truckers don't like that because in one case we had a bridge in Eastern Oregon. The truckers had to detour 156 miles around. Do you think we heard about that? Absolutely. So we were putting out bids and we were fixing bridges, and we would typically get anywhere from 6 to 10 bids on a bridge project. And that was good. That's robust competition. That's what you like as a bidder, as a bid preparer. Suddenly, in a matter of 2 months, it went from 6 to 10 to 0. Wow, what's going on? So I did my market research, albeit after the fact, and I started calling some of those 6 to 10 suppliers that used to provide bids for us. Why aren't you bidding? Well, you bid on a firm fixed price for bridge repair. And he's right. We do bid firm fixed price. And he said, we can figure, most of those things on, escalation kind of a thing and come up with factors that aren't going to harm us. But steel has suddenly gone off the charts. And guess what? China was going through their industrial revolution. China was taking all of the steel, not some of it, all of it. And they said, we can't bid on a project that might be anywhere from 2 to 5 years out and give you a steel price today, not knowing what the market's going to be in 5 years. So what we did is we modified our requirements so that everything was bid on a firm fixed price except steel. Steel we tied to a consumer price index, CPI, consumer price index, and if the CPI went up, which it typically did, then the price of their bid would go up accordingly. So they could give us a fixed price at the time of the bid, and if the CPI went up, that price for steel went up. Everything else remained constant, but we went from 0 back to 6 to 10. So there are creative ways that we can do that, but changes in the market. And if I hadn't been so busy with all these 156 bridge jobs, I might have been able to do the market research to adequately provide for that. But that's where that plays in.
And now you got tariffs.
I'm sorry, what?
Now you have tariffs.
Well, that's a different story. And different class. Different class, okay. It's really a curve. That's a good one. Okay. Okay. Had a request years ago. Governor decided we need to be on the leading edge of this. We want some electrical cars in the motor pool. So the motor pool sent in a request for 60 electrical cars. Wow. Okay. My buyer came to me and said, Rob, I've never bought an electric car. I don't even have any specifications on it. I said, okay, well, get on that internet, see what we've got and what we can find. He came back in just like 30, 45 minutes, and he said, man, I've got 6 or 8 suppliers here that can provide electric cars. So there was a lot of data available. He issued the bid. We got 6 responses. We made a valid award. State got 60 electrical cars. Anybody hear from the governor's office? It doesn't matter because I'm not employed by the state anymore. What are they going to do? Fire me? We bought 60 electrical cars And at that time, there were only two places you could charge. One was the Salem Motor Pool, one was the Portland Motor Pool. But they didn't sit, the good news is they didn't just sit in the motor pool, because there's a lot of transportation going back and forth between Portland and Salem. So we knew we could go north to Portland, charge our vehicle, go through the meeting, drive back, and we didn't cost a dime in gas. So, the one thing I would encourage when you're doing stuff like this, it's a major deviation from your normal operating practices. Think of things like charging stations. It was less than a year ago that I saw an article in the Oregonian that said, hey, all 37 counties now have charging stations open to the public. And I will say that our rest areas, in Oregon anyway, and in other states that I travel through, typically there's 3 or 4 parking slots where you can just pull your electric vehicle in, charge your motor. So it's new, but it's working. But when you don't have those requirements, there are some very creative ways. And certainly what we didn't do, because we didn't have to, we found a day we needed. We could have gone to other states that have purchased electric cars. Moving, moving toward the best value. And I think I said earlier, this is probably the biggest change that I've seen. When I started in 1983, that's not 1883, that's 1983. When I started in 1983, I did 2 RFPs in the first one. 2. And I had to get approval. I had to go through an executive order to get permission to do that. And now we do all kinds of RFPs, and typically the RFP results in the best value rather than the lowest bid. Now, I'm not saying low bid is bad. Don't take that away from this class, because low bid is great if you can succinctly describe the operational requirements that your customer needs. Then you should spend the least amount of money. Low bid works. But you need to be thinking about best value, and that's the difference that we see. Price, delivery, ability to measure performance, quality of the product or service, all depend on how well the spec is written. Okay, be clear in your design and performance specs. Now, I'll finish first. Okay, design spec concentrates how the product is fabricated or constructed. Very specific, often used when purchasing vehicles, equipment, buildings, basic services. It's sometimes called a technical spec. Okay, we want to buy wood stove. And probably Region 8, most of us understand what a wood stove is. So we want a wood stove that's guaranteed to burn up to 4 hours. Firebox dimensions of 24 by 24 by 36. That's a pretty good size wall. To be furnished complete with through-the-wall type stovepipe. Now, all of you could close your eyes and you could envision what that would look like. This meets that spec.
No, Jesus.
So be sure. Now, I will add that sometimes we spend so much time working on specifications that we become conditional to them. We know exactly what we want, just like when we looked at that. Oh, you knew what a wood stove looked like. I didn't need to describe it, but that's the way that spec reads. I did this in Honolulu 2 months ago. They didn't know what a wood stove was. So, whatever, but pretty experience. Okay, let's look at performance spec. It deals with how the product performs. We're looking at outcomes. And we don't describe how you accomplish that. We just describe the outcome that we're looking for. The end result, the outcome, is your primary consideration. Suppliers have great freedom. And, we underutilize our supplier community when they get so rigid with specs that they have to meet everything. Because it takes away the freedom and the creativity that the suppliers bring to the table. Okay, we need to buy a street sweeper. At ODOT, we call them the sewer suckers. They're those things that go by the curb and they sweep all the debris and everything. So we need a minimum sweeping width of 6 feet. Lead brush to break that debris away. Circular brush to dislodge that hard to move stuff. Mounted on a standard commercial chassis, furnished with the typical stuff. That meets that requirement. So you can see, it's a little tongue in cheek here, but it's important. And what I'm trying to do is not entertain you, but make you realize at a basic level, what we do with our specification development is critical for our agency. 4 main elements. If you have an NITP dictionary, this is right out of that dictionary. Minimum requirements, ensure competition, has to be measurable, and equitable word at the lowest cost. Create a specification team. Typically, who writes the specs when you're creating a team? Well, often it's good to have management in, because if it's, again, a mission critical project, you want management's buy-in. You want them to be at the table to say yes or no or whatever. Purchasing professional, if we're not there, this team is doomed. Supplier? Would you ever have a supplier on a team? Yeah, sometimes you would. Highly technical. I remember a project that we were working on with the statewide telecommunications project years ago. We brought in a guy from somewhere on the East Coast, and we were paying him all of his expenses, and we were paying him $400 an hour to help to define some of the nitty-gritty. He didn't work with us for the whole time, but when it came to that part of the functionality of the statewide system, we brought that supplier in. But one of the signatures of agreement was that he would not bid, or any company that he represented would not bid on that project. So anytime that you've got an extremely complex project, you're going to bring that supplier in to gather and gain their expertise. They can't bid on the project. And I think that the ORSs, since my retirement, that the ORSs have tightened that up so that if a supplier provides information, they can't come in around and bid on the project, because we saw that happen sometimes. Obviously, your end user has to be there. And sometimes, copier, for example, computers, things like that. We often had a user committee made up of many different representatives, big agencies, small agencies. We wanted to consider that whole thing. But that's generally who might help write the specifications on a large project. Have a team standardize specifications whenever possible. Our price agreement for desktop computers originally started with 3 computers. Then it morphed to 6. And then it continued to morph. It was like an amoeba that you see in a microscope, and it just keeps going like that. Finally, the suppliers, the pricing wasn't that great. So I started doing a little of that market research that I was talking about. Suppliers were telling me, we've got 46 configurations on the price agreement now. We can't carry that much in inventory. It's hard for us to ramp up when you have a large order of those. So you've got too many laptop computers and desktop computers on the price agreement. So we dropped it back down to fewer, and we used a user committee to establish that, and we got better pricing and availability. ODOT, standardized trucks. You see the big trucks that plow the snow and that haul the gravel and do all those other things. ODOT would typically use 100 of those annually. And like any vehicle, after it reaches a certain amount of miles or time on the motor, stuff like that, they would cycle them back out. But they would typically purchase 100 of those a year. Many different manufacturers, there were basically 7 manufacturers. What our mechanics were finding was they had to have training on 7 different manufacturers because motors today aren't like motors for 20 years ago. You know, you used to be able to take a hammer and a crescent wrench and a screwdriver, and you could fix just about anything on the motor. Now a mechanic gets up there, first thing he does is plug the computer in. So they have to have training on 7 different manufacturers. Our shops had to carry 7 different components. Change was required because we were carrying a huge stock. And ODOT had, I think, 5 motor pools throughout the state. We were carrying a lot of inventory. ODOT decided that we needed to standardize. Okay? We inventoried the parts that we were carrying. We established the standard. And another thing, important thing we did was we talked with the mechanics. They're the ones that did the heart and soul of this contract. So they said, these motors are good, these alternators are good, these brakes, these clutches. So we requested a name brand exception. We went to a public hearing. None of the major manufacturers voiced any concern. 2 of them attended. None of them voiced any concern. So all bids required those 7 different manufacturers: the motor, alternator, the clutch, and several other components. So all the bids required that you bid those particular components. So the results, we reduced the inventory over 250,000 in the first 6 months. Our mechanics loved us because they didn't have to have 7 different trainings anymore. Vendors, and this was an interesting thing, vendors occasionally protested, but they realized that if they're producing for ODOT, they tend to standardize, and by their own standardization, they were getting better pricing. And it took about a year before that cycle started to show, when a supplier came to me one time and said, no, we fought that because we wanted the latitude to buy the cheapest motor available. And by standardizing, we get better pricing. So that was what you would call a win-win. What's your language? If there's any way at all to read your words differently from what you intended, then there's a chance that the contractor will choose it. And if it goes to court, the courts have a rule called the reasonable man rule. And the courts will say, well, how would a reasonable man interpret that? And if the supplier has a good attorney, they're going to be able to convince them that the reasonable man would interpret that. So that's important. Be careful with the language that obligates. Shall typically pertains to a person like contractor shall. Must typically relates to an inanimate object like a report. The report must. Must is also a proper term when something needs to happen before another action can happen. To be eligible for future grants, the party must. So shall and should are totally different. Don't just think that they're interchangeable because they are. Your short, concise sentence or deep sentence should describe one feature. Don't get into one of those, I call them attorney sentences, go on and describe 6 different features. Avoid the unnecessary one. Must be very, very, very fast. I'm not just saying must be fast. Be sure to use industry standards. And this is something that we can't do with everything we buy. But if we're buying nuts and bolts, there's industry standards. If we're buying pipe products, there's standards. Electrical products typically have standards. And if you say, and I can tell you this makes a difference. I was in True Value just the other day trying to get some screws to hang some things. I just heard, and I'm just getting in the process of hanging up the coat hanger and the things like that. So I needed some bolts, and I went in there and I said, you may want to say this in class. I want to validate it. So I walked over to this thing, Schedule 5, and it was a 2-inch by 5/8 inch, $4.19 each. Okay, I'm going to go over here to Schedule 8. Again, the 5/8 and the 2 inches long, $2.19. Half the price. But if you're bidding bolts and you don't specify grade 8 or grade 5, something like that, they're gonna give you the cheapest that they can get. They're gonna give you the Kmart quality. And that's the part, those are the screws and bolts that go into the kids' sets that you buy at Kmart. And that's not gonna be satisfactory. Worst case I ever heard about was a young buyer, or a new buyer, I should say, a new buyer going into a manufacturing facility, wanting to impress his bosses. He got some great pricing on Schedule 5 bolts. Where typically they were buying Schedule 8, but he got a good buy. What they were was the lug bolts for the front tire on trucks. And those Schedule 5 bolts shear because they're not the tensile strength the Schedule 8 is. And consequently, there's some significant damages. So make sure that you use those industry standards. Very quick way of telling the vendor, this is what we want. And remember, that's what we're trying to do. We're communicating with the supplier. Establish your warranties. I had a call several years ago from a water district, and they said, you know, do you have, because we were the front for our surplus property at that time. And they said, do you by any chance have a pump? And they gave me the pump name and capacity in your surplus. No, we don't have anything like that. He said, well, our water pump went out again. They're manufactured in Italy, and it takes about 6 months to make one. And we can temporarily rent one for $4,000 a month. So pump goes out. How much are they out before they get a new pump? $24,000. Right. New pump was just over $7,500. And I said, you know, I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business, but why don't you carry a pump? Oh, no, the board would never let me do that. I said, you take these figures back to them. Now let's just say, for example, instead of one, you bought two. So instead of $7,500, you're spending $15,000, right? Okay. You store one of those in your warehouse, and then when it goes out, you avoid what? $24,000. And, you know, it was the pregnant pause. I couldn't see him. We didn't have visual telephones in those days. I couldn't see him, but I could see the years beginning. And he said, I'll share that with him. So he called me back in about 3 weeks. He said, we had a board meeting last night, and they let me up the order, not one, not two, but three. And still, they bought three for less than the breakdown of one ton. So there's creative ways that we can do these things. And when we make changes like that, do you think that that person believed this? Absolutely. Now, he had no statutory authority to report to me. He was just using me as a resource. But do you think he put a check by my name as valuable resource? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And when we can do those kind of things, maybe we don't receive the direct reward. But, you know, at the end of the day, the greatest reward that you can have is I feel good today. Okay, tips. Clearly state the requirements of sole source. We don't do sole source anymore, do we? I mean, that went away when I retired. Yeah, right. The bane of our existence. But the reality is, there are legitimate sole source concerns. And our challenge as purchasing professionals is to help our end users determine when it's a legitimate sole source and when it's not. I will say at the Secretary of State's office, I had most of our customers trained by the time that I was ready to retire. They knew they didn't come to me with a sole source request without the sole source justification that met all the statutory requirements. I remember just before I left, IT brought one over. She had all the justifications she needed. And it was a smart one. I could do it. I could generate that purchase order in just over the time it was statutorily required for advertising. So Be sure that you understand your sole source procurement. It's a legitimate process, but even in the sole source procurement, make sure that you understand what it is that you're buying. Don't just say, must have a widget. Describe that widget. And what are the functional requirements? What's the outcome that you're looking for? Sole source or equal bids are legitimate, not a license for us to just avoid all that extra work of determining. We have to do our due diligence. For equal, I'm going to skip this one because we're burning a little daylight. When does this class end, Melody? 1:45. Like Robert Frost said, we've got miles to go before we sleep, folks. So I'm going to, yeah. We haven't even got to statement of work in RFP, and that's where the fundraising stuff. Okay. Don't overspec. Don't get too general or vague. Make sure that they're measurable. Those probably the most important. Pre-bid conferences, if you've got mission critical, if you've got complex projects, have your pre-bid conference. If you get protest spec, look at it. Does it have value? Be sure the specs were in the contract, because just in the RFP solicitation isn't enough. Have to roll those over into the contract. And don't allow the contractor to play bait and switch. Food for thought, no matter how many members participated in the development of the spec, purchasing is going to be held accountable. Even if you've got a whole team that you work with, they're still going to blame purchasing if your specs are wrong. Okay, scope of work, statement of work. Are they interchangeable? No, and I didn't see any yes, so that's a good sign. I will say that until a few years ago, because in the reality, some of the 50 states said statement of work, scope of work, same for us. They're two very different vehicles. Scope of work is at the front end of the project. That's when we think we know what we're asking for. Statement of work is when the vendors have been able to provide their creativity, their expertise, and whatever. Typically, your statement of work will have some resemblance to the scope of work, but it's going to be different. Okay. Scope of work, purpose of the scope of work, describe the overall project and the objectives that we're trying to obtain. But this is what we think in our limited expertise. And in fairness, when you get really technical, let's take IT for example. I hate IT. But let's take IT for example. I'm technologically challenged. I've got an iPhone. I think it's a 5. I think it's a 6. I don't know. My wife buys these things for me, and then she's frustrated when I only use one function. I make a call, so that's what I use it for. But I'm technologically impaired. You've heard reasonable accommodation. I need reasonable accommodation around technology. So when you're doing all this and developing these things, it's important that we sit down and we look at the effort that we're trying to accomplish and we describe it. What is a statement of work? Phases of work or services, the major task, area of responsibility, objectives that the contractor has to maintain, the deliverables. And I like the term deliverables as opposed to specifications, because deliverables are typically associated with an outcome. Stated schedule of deliverables aligned with the payment. The greater the magnitude to your agency that the project is, the more you're going to want to tie the deliverables to, tie the payments to the deliverables. Statement of work is typically a result of the entity's scope for work combined with the supplier's response. That last bullet there is the most important. Okay, planning and preparation. Some questions that you need to ask. What are you trying to achieve? What is the use? What's the functionality that we're looking for? What's the outcome? Are you all comfortable using the term outcome rather than specification? Because you should be. That's what we're really looking for. What's the existing environment? Where does this thing have to operate? Okay, the steps to make that procurement objective. Look at the market. Anytime you say, I'm too busy to do a market analysis, then you're falling into that 3 out of 4 group that Rick was talking about this morning. Competitive climate, we talked about steel and China and things like that. Resources available on the product or service. Often with technology, there's places that do all kinds of technological review and analysis for us, and we can tap into those. Sometimes there's a cost associated, sometimes it's free. How is the agency going to use the product? Is it mission critical? And this is a big driver in how we approach all these. Planning and preparation, look at the rules. Rick talked this morning about, where is our authority coming from? Well, that's part of our process too. Analyze what controls need to be in place. How are we monitoring? How are we going to prove that you've met those deliverables? Writing the scope of work, I'm going to move through this one fairly quickly because this is typically what we're looking for. Part 1 is the general information. It's the introduction. This is what we're trying to accomplish. This is the outcomes that we're looking for. Background just is, here's where we're at currently. And that's why we want to get to the outcome that we're looking for. Any other documents that require special insurances, independent contractor status, things like that. Amendments, if there are amendments made, they have to be carried over to the RFP. Travel, big one nowadays, because often the experts that we rely on to help us develop these things are going to travel. And your solicitation should clearly define who gets to travel. The state will pay for one technician to come in, so on and so forth. And I only add this because I saw it happen once at the Secretary of State's office. We had a client or a supplier come in, and they were used to staying in this very elegant suites at the Class 5 hotels, and we had to convince them that they were traveling on the state per diem level. That was a real shock for them. I had a lot of good laughs on that. Anyway, if it isn't stated, then it's hard to enforce. Fortunately for us, that particular contractor was willing to live with the state per diem. Writing the scope of work, look at the work that you're trying to perform. What work is going to be done? If there are schedules involved with the work, that has to be. Some of the projects I've worked on had a legislative mandate. So that was included in the solicitation. That was included in the scope of work. Must be functional by December of 2020. How we're going to monitor that performance. We're going to check every day, every week, every month, deliverables, the accomplishments that are tied to the payment, and how we're going to monitor it. Acceptance is by the agency. Acceptance is a key part of building your scope and your statement of work, because acceptance is by the agency, not by the supplier. Documents and reports required. Writing the scope of work, again, payments. Often you'll see suppliers that want to be paid everything up front. Don't go there. Payment structure should be included as part of your scope of work. And then if there are any unique variables in there, the supplier has a chance to respond to that with the statement of work. And other considerations like security, any other special terms and conditions. Writing the statement of work. Okay, this is a little different than what we just covered, but really we're covering some of the same stuff. We're establishing this contract, here's our authority, and you provide the product, we're going to pay the money. We're looking at outcomes, we're looking at quantities, and those are things that are all in the statement of work. If there are any unique specifications, any reporting requirements, it isn't enough to assume that the industry always makes monthly reports, put it in your statement of work. Make sure that the budget cycle, the payment schedule, and any financial reporting that's essential is included in that statement of work. And now we're going to talk about shift a little bit into the request for proposal. And I've been told I have about 8 minutes to go. So I'm going to talk like that guy that talks to Dave in Denver. But we're looking for solutions or outcomes with the RFP. Rarely do we use an RFP to buy widgets unless we're in some unique operating parameters. We look at the minimum requirements, but we don't tell the supplier, this is how we want you to do it. Can be used for goods, services. We're finding more and more construction projects are being done with an RFP, and that's good. I think the RFP gives us greater latitude as buyers. It gives the suppliers greater latitude as sellers. And if we both are working in that same environment, it's going to result in positives. Considers more than cost. You know, in 30-some years of purchasing, I found that RFP sometimes results in the lowest cost. So it isn't automatic that you're going to pay more, but sometimes you do pay more. Do your market research. Evaluate and score the proposals to look at the best solution. And the best solution is the solution that scores the highest. Your end user can't come to you and say, company A scored the most, but we really like the people with company B, or we like the firm, or we like whatever, so we want to award to company B. It's whatever desirable at points that you determine who scores the highest, they win. Consider considerable interaction between the supplier and the agency. And that, I think, is probably an extremely valuable component of RFPs. Provides cost effective, allows the agency to focus on the things that are important. The things that are important are the mandatories. Gotta do this, we have to have this service. But the desirables allows the agency to come back and meet those things that they can, and if they can't meet them, it doesn't kick them out of the solicitation. But let's encourages the proposers to be creative. Customers can review them, and this is not so positive about the RFP. Our customers sometimes think that it just lets them choose whoever they want to. That's not the way it is. Whoever scores the highest against the criteria that we've developed wins the award. Vendors may view priorities differently, so it's important. And when you're using an RFP, you almost have to have a pretty big confidence. Typically, it's not the cheapest solution. It does take longer. I can do 3 invitations to bid in the time that I do an RFP. That's a standard. Maybe misunderstood by the end users and our customers. And that's why in the early formation of the team, you make sure the end users understand what latitude they have and do not have. When you use your RFP, when you want to look at things other than price, qualifications, preferences, solutions that meet the needs, consider the best value solutions. End result is known, we're not sure how to get there. Complex requirements, multiple solutions. Those are all reasons to use the RFP. Questions we have to ask as we begin. Where are we now? Where do we want to be? What are the must-haves and the nice-to-haves? Must-haves are mandatories. Desirables are the nice-to-haves. Okay, role of market research in the beginning. I think because of time, I'm going to skip that. Use of the request for information. Sometimes what we're buying, we either don't know about or we haven't had time to really look at the market. A good market research tool is a request for information. Contract doesn't result from an RFI. All we're doing is saying, this is where we are, this is where we want to be, does it make sense? And suppliers will tell us, here's your weaknesses, here's your strengths, whatever. Typically, it doesn't reveal cost information. Often, our customer was, well, I want to know about how much we're going to spend. So ask them to put in cost information. Maybe 1 out of 10 supplier will put in cost information. And then it's somewhere between 300,000 and 700,000. You know, that doesn't really tell you a lot anyway. It does not result in a contract. Project team assists in the development. Somebody comes to you and says, here's an RFP you need to do. Hopefully you've got a project team so that you don't have to make all these decisions. Should assist in the development of the evaluation criteria. You may have the same team that develops the requirements do the evaluation. And it's often good because the team's already formed, they know what they're looking for, and you don't go through a re-education process. Determining the criteria, this is where the end user needs to have a strong voice, but not the only voice. Because often they weight the criteria strangely and in a way that it's hard to make the award. Goal of references and the protest process. Mandatory requirements described, you have to have. It's required. Without it, you're out. If you don't have the mandatories, you reject it. Have to be measurable, again, that metric. So, allow me a little levity. I started out with a little levity. Hopefully you'll indulge me for 2 more slides. We're looking at the mandatories for a perfect spouse. Must have a stable, consistent income of not less than $150,000 on an annual basis, with no long-term debt exceeding $5,000. Must own a 4x4 pickup less than 2 years old. Must be able to clean and prepare fishing while game. Now, those are important to me. Remember, these are my specs. Those are important to me. Here's some of the desirables. Meg Ryan look-alike. Put chains on the 4x4. Clean and spin a beer and milk. And really load up the points that you can pack out that beer. Okay. Now, you will see my wife tonight. She is pretty close to me tonight. She is close. So, whatever. But you can see, I made these up. These are important to me. But it's important when you sit down with your customer, what are the features that you have to have? Those become your mandatories. What are the things that you'd like to have? Those become your desirables. How am I doing for time? 1 minute. Okay. Defining a point value. This is a critical one because if you don't put the right points in the right area, suppliers will figure creative ways to get more points by really not providing much more for you. Pricing of proposals. Typically, there's a straightforward metrics. Whatever, if you're getting 100 points for the lowest proposer, every other proposer is something less than that, a proportional relationship. So if the next price is twice as much, they only get 50% of the points. 4 phases, I'm going to end with this one because Melanie's getting really excited back there. 4 phases of RFP scoring. The responsiveness, we typically do that in central purchasing. We bring the supplier, did they send the right number? Were they on time? Is there some either signature or some other attestation that they're going to be found? Then the mandatory requirements are looked at. That's typically not my purview. That's typically going to be the evaluation team. Then they put together the technical score. Pricing is pretty simple. I can do the pricing, but the technical score is done without seeing the pricing. Because the biggest complaint the suppliers will bring to you is that they looked at the price and scored according to the price. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up because Melanie's starting to go through it. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you, Rob.